Viewers like you make this program possible. Support your local PBS station.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from SAFEWAY stores.
Here is the head of lettuce before, and here is the head of lettuce after I've gotten through torturing it. Stick around and see what we do to lettuce and other vegetables today on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Today we are going to do two important French recipes: laitue braisé, braised lettuce, and choucroute garnie, braised sauerkraut. Braising, one often thinks of as only being in connection with meat, but it's extremely good with quite a number of vegetables. And in these two recipes we're going to do, you will learn how both to braise lettuce, which is the same as braising celery or turnips or other vegetables, and with the braised sauerkraut you can also do braised cabbage, and both of them are very much related, and you'll see how as soon as I begin. And we shall start out with the lettuce. The lettuce, the nicest lettuce, but also the most expensive, is Boston or native lettuce, as they call it in Boston. But you can use chicory or frizzy lettuce. This is called endive in England, which mixes everyone up. Or you can use escarole. This is a lettuce with a rather sturdy leaf. And if you're going to use either of the lettuce, you trim it and you wash it first. And I'll show you how you do that. You want to buy the lettuce with a little bit of a stem on it. And you want to trim the stem off to make it nice and clean, taking a little knife and leaving on a little bit of it because you want something to hold on to. And then to wash it, you take two lettuces at a time and just pump them up and down in a basin of cold water to get rid of the sand. And you want to do it gently because you don't want the leaves to separate. And then we have to blanch it so that it will turn out like this. And for that you put 3 or 4 lettuces in a very large pot of water that's rapidly boiling and let them boil for about a minute or two until they have become limp like this. And then as soon as they're limp, you take them out and refresh them in cold water so that you can handle them easily. And then you want to squeeze all the water out. So hold it like that and then just squeeze gently with your hand, because we want to get all of this liquid out because we're going to put some other liquid in when we braise them. But you want to do that gently so that you do not hurt the lettuce too much. I mean, you can't, it's not a real torture that they're going to go through. Now here's a chicory, and you see after braising that is much bigger. There's your little Boston lettuce, and then here is your chicory. So you can see that for about the same price per lettuce you have much more to work with a chicory, but the taste is less fine. You see, I'm just squeezing it sort of with both hands, but I'm not squeezing it so hard that I'm making it burst. And then, when you have your lettuce all squeezed, I'm going to put this fresh lettuce out of the way, and also that. And then you're ready to start into work, but I'm going to first make the braising base, and I'm going to cook it in a low casserole. I'm going to set that over heat, and we're going to put in a little bit of oil or butter. I'm using just some plain cooking oil there. And then we're going to put in some blanched bacon. We've used blanched bacon several times, and what it is just ordinary piece of smoked bacon which has been cut and then simmered in water for about 10 minutes to get rid of the smoky taste of the bacon. Otherwise, everything would taste of bacon. Then I'm going to put in about ½ cup of sliced onions. and about 1/3 cup of sliced carrots. And that's your braising base, and that should cook slowly for about 10 minutes until until the bacon has rendered its fat a little bit and until the vegetables have become tender. If you add vegetables right away to a braising base that haven't been cooked through, they don't give out their flavor. And what we want to do with this lettuce, because lettuce, if you just boil it in salted water, hasn't any taste at all, what we're doing is giving it another taste. And so you want the vegetables to exude all of the flavor they have when they get into the liquid, which we shall be adding. And then while your braising base is cooking, you cut your lettuce in half. If you've got the big one, that's your chicory, and the escargot looks just about like that, just about the same shape. You cut it in half, and these little, there's your Boston lettuce, that you can either leave whole or cut in half. I'll cut one in half and leave one whole so you can see the difference. And with the Boston lettuce, you would want about 1 lettuce per serving, or depending if you were using a vegetable garniture, half of a lettuce would probably be enough. And then after you have them cut, you sprinkle them with a little bit of salt. It's very important with lettuce that you be careful about giving the flavor that they lack. And then after you've salted the inside, you fold it up to make a little triangle. And then turn it over so that it makes a nice shape. You can make whatever shape you like. But I think this is the more usual. And then the Boston lettuce also gets folded up. And there's the whole lettuce, so that gets folded up too. And I think this will look better on this side. You just want to think of which way it looks best in the pan. And then after your braising vegetables have become soft and translucent, you take out half of them into a little side dish, because we're going to have half on the bottom and about half on the top. And then we arrange our lettuce in the pan. You usually use just one kind, but I'm using several so that you can see what they all look like. Then I have some more that's already ready over here, and we'll put them in. There we have our little Boston lettuces up here, which I can put in the corners. Now you can cook and serve the lettuce in the same dish in which you braise it. If you're going to cook it in the same dish, it would be best to cut up your vegetables in a very pretty dice. Then arrange a piece of bacon over the top of each of these, because the fat is going to give flavor as it braises. Ooh, that's hot. And then put the vegetables over. And then we're going to put in our liquids. And now you can use wine if you'd like to, white wine or white vermouth. I'll put in a little bit of white vermouth, about half a cup. Now in this kind of a recipe, the proportions are not terribly important. Just watch the method, because you may find when you do it yourself you'd like a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. Now I'm also putting in some brown beef stock, or you can use a combination of canned beef stock and water, canned beef bouillon, which would be very good. And then we want some herbs in, that is thyme and parsley and bay leaf tied together with string. And then you want to let that come up to the simmer, and then we're going to cover it and put it in the oven. Just clean up a little bit as I go along. And now we're going to cover it first with a piece of waxed paper. And this is a rather nice French chef's method. If you want to cover something like an oval casserole with paper, you fold it in half, and then you fold it in half again, and then center it there, and then make a little crease along, and then just tear where the crease is. Either tear it or cut it with scissors. And then you have roughly the right shape. It doesn't naturally have to fit exactly. You see, then that covers nicely. And then as I don't have an oval top for this, I'm going to use a piece of aluminum foil and then just put on whatever cover I have that will just about fit it. There's that, and that'll sort of hold it down. And then that's going to go into a 350-degree oven. And that's to cook very slowly for about 2.5 hours. Of course, the lettuce will be tender within 1 hour, but the whole point of the braising is that there is an exchange of flavors between the lettuce and the braising liquid. And so now here is exactly the same thing, which has been in about 2 hours, and we'll see how it looks and what we have to do with it. Now there's our cover and our 2 pieces of paper. There. Then we're going to make our sauce for it. This seems to have absorbed practically all the liquid I put in, but I'm going to show you anyway how we would make the sauce. Now I've got a serving platter. And in this case, because we didn't cut the vegetables up in a very neat fashion, I'm going to take the lettuce out and arrange it on a platter and then finish the sauce. You see, with the having cooked and with all of these nice vegetables and things, the lettuce has taken on an entirely new flavor. I might even have done better had I secured the lettuce here and there with some string. There's an herb bouquet. In that case, I had tied it up in a washed cheesecloth bag. You can see if you had diced your vegetables neatly, you wouldn't need to, you could just leave them on with the lettuce. There's a little piece of Boston lettuce there. And this goes extremely well as a vegetable with red meat, such as beef or steak. Now, usually there's a little more liquid than this in it, so I'll just put a little bit more in so I can show you how we do the sauce. Say that you had that much liquid in, then you give it a thickening with cornstarch, and you could also add a little bit of wine at this point. And I'll put in a little bit of white vermouth. I'll put the cornstarch in first. That's a very little sauce, so I'll put in just about half a tablespoonful. And then put in 2 or 3 tablespoons of white vermouth and mix it up. And then we would take this off heat always when you're putting in your starch. We've done this kind of a thickening so much, but it's an extremely useful one to know. And then that goes back over heat and gets stirred around until it thickens and clears. And you want to be sure at this point to be sure that the sauce is beautifully flavored. You could, if you wanted, say if you were serving this with goose or with pork, you might want to use port wine instead of white wine, or you wouldn't have to use any wine at all. And now that has just thickened up and come to the simmer, so we just pour this off through a sieve over the. It's a little bit awkward to handle. And I'm going to give it a final fillip, which is just a little butter off heat, and just before you serve it, put in your butter and then swish that around, and that gives the sauce what the French call an unctuosity, and it's just lovely. Now, if I can manage to pour this through a sieve over our lettuce, I'll be very smart. But I think I shall. There it goes. So there, that is all ready to serve. And you'll find that a delicious way to use lettuce, and most people have never seen it done that way, and it's extremely good. And now we're going to do our sauerkraut. I want to point out before we start in with the sauerkraut that if you're going to braise celery, you do it in exactly the same way as we did the lettuce. You blanch it first, and then you cook it in exactly the same fashion in a flat pan and finish your sauce the same way. And now we have sauerkraut. And as you know, sauerkraut is fresh cabbage that has been fermented by cutting it up very fine and then putting it down in salt with a weight on it. And then it begins to ferment. And after the fermentation has stopped, the cabbage is ready to eat. And this is an age-old way of preserving cabbage that has been done for centuries. And in France, when you get your sauerkraut, it's just always fresh in a barrel. I haven't seen any around here lately fresh in a barrel, but I got some kosher sauerkraut, which comes in a jar and has to be refrigerated. It's nice and fresh, but the kosher variety usually has some sugar in it. It just depends on what you like, and it isn't too strong a brine. It's very nice. And now, because we're doing the French method of sauerkraut, if you want to do it that way, you would you would drain the sauerkraut and wash it off in cold water, and then soak it for about 10 minutes or 20 minutes in water, and then keep tasting it. And when as much of the sourness has come out as you would like, you then squeeze it all out, just like that, just the way we did the lettuce, fluff it up, and you're then ready to cook it. I like it, frankly, with most of the sourness taken out, but it still is very different than fresh cabbage, even though you have taken out the sourness, because it is fermented, it's not fresh. And then we start out exactly the same way as we did with our lettuce. We cook our braising vegetables. I've put in the wrong thing there, which I often seem to do. I should put in with a little bit of oil, or if you happen to have goose, you could use rendered goose fat. And then we want some bacon. I have 1.25 quarts of sauerkraut there, so I'm going to put in that would be about 4 ounces of bacon. And this again is blanched bacon. And then when that has begun to render its fat, you then put in your vegetables. And again, we will put in I'm going to put in about 3/4 of a cup of onions and about 1/3 of a cup of carrots. This doesn't make very much difference how much you put in. It just depends on how you like it. And then you allow the vegetables to sweat. And that means that they cook very slowly in a covered saucepan. This is the easiest way to make them cook slowly. You cover the pan and let it cook for about 10 minutes. And of course, while you're doing that, you can be finishing your sauerkraut of squeezing and so forth. And then when your vegetables are tender, you see this is just exactly the same as the lettuce up to this point, you then put in your sauerkraut. And then we have another period of sweating. And these are all very important points in that this is what adds the flavor to things. And you want to stir it all around to get the sauerkraut covered with the fat and the vegetables. And then over a very low heat again, you cover it and let it sweat again for 10 minutes. And this adds that, as the French say, that je ne sais quoi to the flavor of it. And then after that has sweated for 10 minutes, you put in your liquids. And you can, in Alsace in France, that's sort of the German part of France, they cook sauerkraut entirely in dry white wine, like a Riesling. And we're going to cook it in a little bit of vermouth. I'm putting in about 1/2 cup there. And then chicken stock. And you can use canned chicken stock. I think some of this kosher canned chicken stock is extremely good. And you want to cover it so that it's just what we call à fleur, or means just to the flour. That means that you can just, the liquid has just come almost up to the top. And then if you have not gotten enough, if your stock is not well flavored, you would add salt, and then you would also add an herb bouquet. And in this one, we have parsley and a bay leaf and thyme, and also, if you can find them, and it's not very easy, but I'm sure that if you ask your grocery store, they can order them, some juniper berries. And juniper berries are what they flavor gin with. They look just like little peppercorn or allspice corns, but they have a particular flavor that's very much used in Alsace. And then you take your herb bouquet and you bury it down in your sauerkraut. And then again, we want a paper cover. And here's another method of how to make a round paper cover in a quick and easy way. Now you fold your paper in half, then you fold it in half again, and then you just keep folding it until it makes sort of looking like a paper airplane, and then you measure your pan like that, and then you just tear it off, and then you put on your cover. And in this instance, we very much want to have a cover on because this is a heavy iron pot, and the cover in the oven is going to get very hot too. So if you didn't have your paper on, the sauerkraut would brown on top, which we don't want it to do. Now, if you were cooking red cabbage, you would use exactly these same steps. You'd use the same vegetables, and you would also have the cabbage cut finely, and you do that sweat. And then, because you want the cabbage to stay red, you would put in red wine, and you also want something acid, because acid keeps red red for some reason. I'm not a chemist, I don't know why. You would use red wine and stock. So, in other words, think of sauerkraut and cabbage as exactly the same things. And then this is going to go into a 350 oven, and it's to cook very, very slowly, and come back in about half an hour and take a look at it. And if it's cooking too fast, turn the oven down to about 325. And this sauerkraut has to cook between 3 and 5 hours. It depends on the quality of the sauerkraut. I found that this kosher sauerkraut cooked in about 3.5 hours, and it was delicious. But what you have to do is you taste it all the time that you're cooking it. I mean, after about, it takes at least 2.5 hours, and then begin tasting it, and it's supposed to have a lovely, deep, delicious flavor to it. And so now we're ready to assemble our sauerkraut. And now this sauerkraut, I have made it a sauerkraut garni. In other words, when the sauerkraut had cooked for about 2 hours, I browned some pork chops and some Italian sausages and then buried them in the sauerkraut so they've all cooked together. And that is an extremely nice way to do it because you get even more flavor in your sauerkraut. Now, there are pork chops. I also have a bit of ham, which goes nicely. That's sort of the classic accompaniment. And I'm going to take all of these vegetables and things out. And there's our little herb bouquet. And there come the rest of our chops. This is going to make a very hearty dinner for 5 people. There's some more of our sausages. There's another one. And then we'll arrange it on a platter. I'll move the sauerkraut over. And then you see these meats will, of course, have rendered a bit of fat also, so that you lift the sauerkraut out and drain it. And then after you've lifted it and drained it, you can then take the grease off the juices. You see how that really is cooked down. That was 1.5 quarts of sauerkraut, but it's cooked down to be not an enormous amount. I think, too, you'll find that if you cook sauerkraut in this way of the squeezing and washing of it, that if you have people in your family who are not particularly partial to sauerkraut, you may find that they're going to like it very much indeed. There are chops. This is really an awfully good dish, and it certainly is not very expensive to do. There. One more chop. Other sausages around. And then the ham, ideally, you would heat up before. I didn't heat it up because I didn't want to take all that time. And then that goes around and over. And then sauerkraut is always served with boiled potatoes. We always seem to be serving boiled potatoes, but ever since Parmentier discovered the potatoes, the French seem to use them for everything. There. And now, I'm going to take it into the dining room and you'll see how it looks. This makes a very nice one-course meal because all you have to do is to boil or steam the potatoes. Now I'm going to serve you some so you can see how it looks on the plate. And with this, you could serve some mustard. And, of course, it's a little bit difficult after you've arranged the ham to get the sauerkraut off. There you are. And the traditional accompaniment would either be Alsatian wine or beer, which is extremely good with it. Yeah, that makes a really fine dinner. And then here again is our braised lettuce, so you can take a look at that. And so now we've sort of done French vegetable braising. And as you remember, with the braised lettuce technique, you can use celery in exactly the same fashion, or you can use endive, you know, those nice little white wit loaves that cost about 79 cents a pound. They're delicious braised this way. And then with your sauerkraut, you can do red cabbage or plain cabbage exactly the same way. Now, this is a point I'd like to bring up in that doing two related recipes like this, it's the technique that's important to watch. Because whenever you're cooking, think of, if you're doing a certain dish, think of, isn't this like something I've done before? And then by that way you relate things, and that's how you learn to cook. And if you approach cooking in that spirit, you'll make even cooking vegetables an adventure. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.